On the subject of oil, Prime Minister arguing broad shoulders of the UK and the broad tax base to soak up the volatility. What do you make of that?
Well, of course, people in Scotland and Aberdeen in particular just look across to Norway, where a country smaller than Scotland, more oil and gas dependent than Scotland, has handled its resources infinitely better than Westminster. It hasn't been so much the broad shoulders of Westminster as the vast cavern in the Treasury over the last 40 years, where they've accumulated massive oil and gas revenues from Scotland. The reason they want to hang on to Scotland's resources is they've done so well out of them over the last 40 years. The reason I want the next 40 years to be different is I want the next 40 years of oil and gas to be a story not just of companies and workers benefiting, which I think is very important, but also the people of Scotland. So I think the next 40 years should be Scotland's turn.
Do you feel, what about the argument about volatility? The Prime Minister says, Davies saying only this morning that it's only by having a broad tax base that you can soak up the different problems.
Well, actually, Norway is more dependent on oil and gas than Scotland is, but they've handled things better. And of course, what they've done is built up this huge savings fund, the Norwegian pension fund, which is now worth £100,000 a head for every man, woman and child in Norway. Now, we should have done that in Scotland over the last 40 years, but luckily, we've got a chance over the next 40 years, because that's the length of time at least that North Sea oil and gas will last. So, you know, we should learn the lessons from Westminster control, which hasn't benefited Scotland in terms of oil and gas, and now move to a situation where Scotland will take control. And if we emulate what the Norwegians have done, then we won't do too badly.
How do you characterise the Prime Minister's arguments? Do you think they're sensible, daft, intelligent? What? How do you?
Well, I don't think this is an argument he can win. I mean, you cannot jet into an oil-producing province and say, look, you'll actually be better off if we handle your resources. You know, these resources are so big, so massive, so profitable that only Westminster government can discharge that responsibility. What we've actually had from Westminster is incoherence in tax policy. I think there's been 10 changes in the last few years. There's been 14 oil ministers in the last 7 years. What we get from Scotland is a steady application, consistency of policy, not just for the short term, but for the long run benefit of the industry and, crucially, for the people of Scotland.
You used to say it's Scotland's oil. You still say that?
Oh, it's Scotland's oil. Well, about 90% of it is Scotland's oil. I make no claim to fracked gas in England. That's an English resource, and rightly so. But in terms of the waters around Scotland, it should be Scotland's oil. The problem is that Scotland hasn't had the real benefits. I mean, there hasn't many, I can't really think of any countries in the world who've discovered oil and gas, but many people in the population have got relatively poorer. But that has been Scotland's fate under Westminster control. I think it can be very different and much better for the Scottish people with independence and control of our own resources.
Do you think the Prime Minister is deliberately targeting this because it's been such an SNP shibboleth in the past?
Well, whether it's deliberate or accidental, I don't really care. I mean, let's have this argument and debate. Now, for us, oil and gas is, of course, a bonus. I mean, without oil and gas, the Scottish economy would be approximately as prosperous as the UK economy as a whole. With oil and gas, about 15% better off. So oil and gas in that sense is a bonus, but it's one of the great natural resources of Scotland. And our belief is if you combine these natural resources with the human resources that Scotland has, then we can produce something pretty special, a country which is not just more prosperous, but a country which is fairer, a country which is more equitable in the way it treats its people. That's the argument for Scottish independence and control of our own resources.